Welcome back to Shadow Fear. Let me ask you something. Would you take a job that pays 3 times your usual salary? Most people would say yes without thinking twice. But before you decide, listen to what happened to 9 people who did exactly that. They were offered work in Alaska during the polar night, when the sun doesn't rise for over 2 months. Endless darkness. No dawn, no daylight, just black sky and the sound of the wind. At first, everything seemed fine. The pay was incredible, the job simple enough. But as the days blurred into nights that never ended, they began to understand why the offer was so generous. Because something else lives in that darkness. Something that doesn't want to be seen and doesn't want them to leave. By the time they realized they weren't alone, it was already too late. Whatever was out there wanted something from them. Something they could never give back. Before we begin, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because Shadow Fear brings you true stories that will chill you to the bone. Now, kill the lights. Because what happened during Alaska's endless night will stay with you long after this story ends. Rosa Santos had always believed that bread carried memory. Every loaf she baked in Phoenix, from the crackling sourdoughs to the delicate almond croissants, held the warmth of her hands, the rhythm of her breath, the echoes of her grandmother's kitchen. Baking was her way of keeping the world in order. You measured, you mixed, you waited. There was comfort in the predictability of yeast and time. But predictability doesn't pay the rent. When the job listing for Midnight Sun Bakery appeared on a culinary board, offering double her salary and housing in Anchorage, she told herself it was fate. 4 months, she murmured, studying the listing. I can do 4 months. By late October, she was stepping out of a plane into a world that seemed made of silence and frost. Anchorage shimmered under a bruised sky, the sun already low enough that daylight felt like a rumor. Her taxi driver, a soft-spoken man with a beard stiff with ice, told her it would be the last sunset she'd see for months. After tomorrow, he said, the dark doesn't lift. Not really. Rosa laughed politely. He didn't. Midnight Sun Bakery sat at the corner of Northern Lights Boulevard, a brick building with large frosted windows and a glow that looked like safety itself. Inside, warmth rushed over her, carrying the smell of butter, coffee, and cinnamon. A woman named Sue, the day manager, greeted her with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. You'll be running the overnight shift, Sue said, leading her past the counter and into the gleaming kitchen. We keep things running around the clock. Anchorage doesn't sleep during the polar night, neither do we. The kitchen was immaculate. 3 industrial ovens, steel counters, mixers the size of small cars. Rosa felt a thrill of satisfaction. Everything she needed to make perfect bread. The shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. She'd work mostly alone, baking for the morning rush and prepping pastries for the display cases. Sue introduced the 2 night counter clerks, Maria and Tom, both polite, both pale, both moving with a strange, slow grace like people underwater. They'll handle customers, Sue said. You just bake. Keep the ovens going and keep the light warm. The first week was peaceful. The silence of the polar night pressed against the windows, and inside, Rosa's world became simple again. Flour, water, salt, and heat. She found comfort in the routine. Kneading dough while snow drifted outside, watching the glow of the ovens bloom like miniature suns. The customers who came in after midnight were harmless enough. Airport staff, insomniacs. People chasing warmth in a city swallowed by darkness. She would hear Maria's soft laughter at the counter, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the low murmur of the radio. Anchorage was cold, but the bakery felt alive, until the orders began to change. It started with a note on the counter one night. 1 loaf of memory bread. For Mrs. Patterson, thank you. Rosa frowned. There was no such thing as memory bread. When she asked Maria about it, the woman just smiled faintly. You'll know what to do, she said. Rosa laughed it off as a joke, but that night, as she gathered ingredients for her usual sourdough, her hands hesitated. There was flour on the shelf she didn't remember buying, pale, almost weightless. The bag had no label. The water from the tap ran cold, but it smelled faintly like rain from another century. Without meaning to, Rosa began mixing, her body remembering something her mind did not. The dough came together on its own rhythm. 12 minutes of kneading. Always 12. While she worked, thoughts of her grandmother surfaced. The smell of cardamom, the warmth of her hug, the lullaby she used to hum. As Rosa pressed her palms into the dough, the air filled with the scent of her grandmother's kitchen. When the loaves came out of the oven, they seemed to breathe. Their crust shimmered softly, and steam rose carrying the faint aroma of old birthdays and lost summers. Maria took the bread to a woman waiting in the corner booth. The woman's hair was silver, her eyes red with weeping. When she bit into the loaf, she began to cry, not from pain, but from the kind of relief that looks like breaking. Rosa stood frozen, watching through the kitchen window as the woman smiled through her tears, whispering something into the dark. The next morning, Rosa told herself it was exhaustion. The night can make anything seem strange, but the orders continued. Sorrow cakes, hope muffins, winter grief cookies. Each name felt like a riddle, and yet when Rosa tried to ask Sue for clarification, Sue just gave her that same strange half-smile. The recipes come when they're needed, she said. And they did. Ingredients appeared that shouldn't exist, sugar that glimmered like frost, butter that smelled faintly of laughter, salt that tasted like old tears. Her hands moved without thought, and her chest ached with emotions that weren't hers. The baking had changed. It wasn't cooking anymore. It was conjuring. Customers came and went at odd hours, some pale and silent, others trembling as they ate her pastries, leaving lighter than before. Rosa began to recognize what she was feeding them: grief, hope, closure. The bakery wasn't just a business. It was a threshold, and each night, the darkness outside pressed closer to the windows, as if something beyond the glass was watching, waiting. By December, the line between her recipes and her memories had blurred. Sometimes she'd find herself kneading dough while whispering to no one. Other times she'd look up and realize hours had passed, the ovens burning bright and full of pastries she didn't remember making. Her body was tired, but her hands never stopped moving. And then one night, when the wind howled like voices beyond the glass, she saw them, pale figures standing outside in the snow, their faces indistinct, their eyes hollow with hunger. They didn't come inside, but their breath fogged the windows. Rosa felt the oven's heat behind her, and the cold pressing from the other side, as if the bakery itself had become a fragile line between two worlds. The clock read 3:33 a.m. The bell above the door chimed once, though no one entered, and in the silence that followed, Rosa realized the truth. The Midnight Sun Bakery never closed, not for the living and not for the dead. By the third month, Rosa could no longer tell if she was sleeping at all. Her days bled into nights, her nights into something else entirely. The sun hadn't risen in weeks, and her sense of time had crumbled with it. There was only the rhythm of the oven, the deep hum of heat, and the faint tapping on the bakery windows when the snow grew too still. The phantom customers had stopped pretending to be living. They didn't order anymore. They asked. Their voices seeped through the walls, low and trembling like wind trapped in glass. Bread for remembering, one would whisper from the alley. Cakes for the cold, another murmured. And Rosa, trembling in her flour-streaked apron, would obey. Her ingredients had changed beyond recognition. The flour shimmered like powdered moonlight. The sugar wept condensation that smelled of rain. Sometimes, when she opened the refrigerator, she'd find jars labeled in handwriting she didn't recognize. Comfort, regret, first love, December 2012. She stopped questioning it. Her hands simply knew which emotions to stir into which dough. She was no longer cooking for people. She was translating their grief. When she delivered the memory bread to customers, their faces flickered, sometimes clear, sometimes translucent. They'd smile with a familiarity that made her chest ache. She began to recognize them. The old woman who lost her husband, the young man who came every night to eat hope muffins with his head bowed, the child who always asked for birthday rolls though no one ever picked him up. They were steady, quiet, and patient, people shaped by need rather than life. And they loved her baking. Each bite brought them warmth that shimmered like candlelight. But when they left, that warmth faded back into the frost outside. They always returned the next night, hungrier than before. Rosa realized they weren't eating to live. They were eating to remember what living felt like. One night, the bell above the door rang long and low. Rosa expected Maria or Tom, but instead found Sue standing there, or what looked like Sue. Her skin had gone ashy, her hair brittle, her breath visible in the warm air. "You've done well," Sue said, her voice brittle as glass. "They're satisfied. It's been years since anyone's fed them properly." Rosa felt something stir in her chest, not pride, but dread. "Who are they?" she asked. Sue smiled. "Customers. Always customers. The kind that never stop coming." That night, Rosa dreamed of the oven opening by itself. Inside, loaves rose and pulsed like living hearts. When she woke, the smell of baking filled the air, though she hadn't lit the oven. The kitchen lights flickered, revealing shapes standing between the racks, faint silhouettes watching her with hollow hunger. One reached out a pale hand, its fingers dusted with her own flour, and touched her cheek. It was cold, but it didn't hurt. It felt like recognition. From that night on, Rosa stopped distinguishing between living and dead orders. Everyone who entered the bakery or hovered just beyond its glow was simply hungry, and she knew how to feed them. She began to bake in silence, her thoughts dissolving into the rhythm of mixing, kneading, waiting. The dough whispered as it rose. Sometimes it whispered names. In February, the first sunlight returned, weak and cold, barely grazing the horizon. Rosa thought she'd feel relief, but instead she felt a deep, aching loss. The phantom customers began fading from view, their voices muffled by the return of day. One by one they vanished, leaving crumbs that melted like snowflakes on her counter. The bakery felt emptier than it ever had before. That was when Rosa realized the truth. They weren't gone. They were waiting for her. The warmth she'd baked into their food had come from herself, little by little, piece by piece. Every loaf she made had taken something, her joy, her memories, her warmth, until there was almost nothing human left to give. But still she baked, because some hungers, once awakened, refused to sleep again. When spring arrived and her contract ended, Rosa packed her bags and boarded a flight back to Phoenix. The sunlight felt wrong on her skin. Her reflection in the airplane window was pale, her eyes washed out, her breath fogging even in the warm cabin air. She lasted 6 months in Arizona before the pull began again, a gentle ache that whispered from the north. "They need you." "They're hungry." By November, Rosa was back in Anchorage. The Midnight Sun Bakery had been closed for years, boarded up, the sign rusted and broken. But when she touched the door handle, it swung open easily. Inside, the ovens were already warm. The shelves were stocked with ingredients that shimmered faintly under the flickering lights. And on the counter sat a handwritten note in her own handwriting. "Shift begins at 11. The regulars are waiting. Now every winter, when the polar night descends and the streets fall silent under endless dark, the bakery lights flicker back to life. Locals say they can smell bread at 3 in the morning, sweet and strange like warmth from another world. They whisper that if you follow that scent, you might see her, a pale woman dusted in flour, baking in silence, her hands moving in perfect rhythm. They say she'll offer you a loaf, fresh from the oven. And if you take it, if you eat it, for just a moment, you'll remember something you lost. A face, a feeling, a heartbeat. But when the warmth fades, you'll find yourself hungry again, and you'll go back to the bakery. You'll knock on the window in the endless night, and this time Rosa will already be waiting. I'd mopped blood from emergency rooms and greasy rainbows from the floors of 20 different food courts. But Fairbanks in December hit different, like the dark had a weight to it, like it climbed into your lungs and settled there. Bentley Mall looked the same as any small city mall when I punched in at 9:58 p.m. Anchor stores asleep behind their grates, a food court shining with the wet gleam of disinfectant, pop music looping too low to hear the words. They hired me because I don't mind the night. The manager, a thin man named Ron who wore a radio like a medal, walked me past the locked storefronts and pointed with his clipboard. "North entrance to South Concourse. Trash first, floors last, bathrooms every 2 hours. You'll have the place to yourself." He didn't look at me when he said it. He stared, like everyone here, at the parts of the ceiling where the heat breathed. "If you see folks after midnight," he added almost as an afterthought, "let 'em be. Night shoppers don't cause trouble if you don't." I laughed like that was a joke. The polar night had already erased the sun. Even during day, the world was a bruise. By my 4th lap, the building's hum folded into my pulse, HVAC in my ears, vacuum in my hands, rubber wheels whispering on tile. At 2:03 a.m., while I was cutting a wet sash across the corridor by GameStop, I saw 3 teenagers inside the closed store, controllers in hand, screens sputtering with light. The metal grate was down, locked. The receipt printer flicked a blank ribbon like a tongue. The kids grinned at something on the screen that, from where I stood, was only noise. I rapped the glass with my knuckles. They looked over, polite as pew-sitters, gave me a little nod, and melted back into the game. The clerk behind the counter, blurry in the bright, sorted cases as though inventory mattered to the dead of night. I thumbed my radio. "Ron, you got somebody forgot to lock up GameStop?" Static. Then his voice, thin and flat. "Night customers come and go. Keep the aisles clear." I knew pranks. I knew bored teens and clerks cutting corners. This wasn't that. By 2:30, I'd counted browsers behind 5 other locked grates. A woman in the jewelry store lifting chains to the light. A couple in Hot Topic admiring shirts like talismans. A man in the bookstore reading from a volume of blank pages with the attention of a surgeon. Their money, when I saw it change hands, looked right until it hit the counter, until it turned cold enough to sting the palm. No registers chimed, no receipts printed. Still, everyone behaved as though they'd agreed on the math of it. My cart squeaked and echoed, and nobody told me to move along. But they all made way when my mop slid under their feet. Careful, courteous, like we were colleagues on different shifts. The food court started serving at 3:12. 3 restaurants that had closed at 9. Fluorescent halos thrown over trays that gave off no smell. A woman lifted a slice of pizza and chewed air with ceremony. A man emptied a cup of invisible soda and sighed with satisfaction. When I cracked the trash can later, there was nothing inside. Between passes, I found money on the tabletops. Tips, I guess, coins too heavy for their thickness. Bills that turned blurry under the mall's sodium lights. I put them in my pocket anyway. My hands ached with the chill they left behind. By the second week, new stores hatched where blank walls should have been. A place with no sign sold nothing but frames, empty and elaborate. A store called Memory Palace cataloged a past you could browse by aisle. Summer afternoons, small triumphs, lost voices. A corridor unrolled toward a level I'd never seen on the floor plan, lined with shuttered shops that opened their eyes when I passed. The keys on my ring, assigned for Sears, for Bath and Body, for storage and supply, started working on doors I hadn't known existed. You think you'll scream when reality shears like that? I didn't, I adjusted. I added phantom aisles to my route. I learned where the dust gathered in stores that weren't there at noon. Learned that the vacuum will fill with grit that looks like ash until you blink and the bag is light again. I learned that the bathrooms downstairs needed attention on the hour, even though there was no downstairs. That the hand dryers blew a wind that smelled like old pennies. People in the new places asked me for directions. The experiences from before? A woman in a coat made of some dove gray nothing asked, and I surprised myself by answering, "Past the food court, left at the store with the frames, 3rd door with no handle." She thanked me. I'd never been there, but I knew. I started taking my breaks at 4 hour when the phantom food court was busiest. The burger that was not a burger filled my stomach better than anything I'd pulled from the vending machine. The warmth of the cup that was not coffee moved through me like a small brave sun. When I caught my reflection in a darkened window, the man looking back wore a version of my face softened to gray, slowing to the rhythm of the building. I tried to take pictures for proof. My phone showed the broom moving by itself, my cart ghosting past empty storefronts, the gloss of a floor no one had walked on. The people, customers, clerks, the jeweler, the teenagers, the crowd at the memory store never registered. But I didn't need the pictures. I had the route in my feet, the map grafted to the soles of my shoes. At 5:57, the day guard's keys clattered and the morning shift trickled in with coffee and chatter. The phantom stores sealed themselves like mouths. The coins in my pocket warmed to ordinary metal. I clocked out with salt at my temples and a silence in my chest that felt like pride. The mall slept for no one. It only changed who it served. And I, mop-wielding, trash-hauling Carlos Mendoza, had realized why they'd hired me. The living left footprints that a man with a broom could follow. The others, the ones who shopped when the clock stopped, left something else behind. A residue like cold breath on glass. It was work. It needed doing. And I had 8 hours to learn a second mall before dawn and forgot it existed. The rules were simple. Be thorough, be quiet, be kind. And they worked until the mall added a third rule I hadn't agreed to. Be ours. It began with the tips. Not the coins or the bills. Those I started leaving on the break room table. Unsure if the day staff felt the cold they carried. But the notes tucked beneath them, Small slips of paper curled like onion skin, ink the color of old bruises. Good polish on the terrazzo outside memory. Spill contained by frames, thank you. The north corridor opens at 2:17 tonight. Mind the seam. I didn't show them to Ron. I didn't throw them away. I kept them in the inside pocket of my jacket and found, with a blush of shame I couldn't explain, that the praise mattered more than it should. The mall grew meticulous with me. Spill patterns repeated as if certain accidents wanted cleaning a certain way. Gray dust ringed the chairs in the bookstore that had no books. When I lifted the cushions, indentations remained, the exact shape of a reader's patience. The unseen escalator, only present after 3 hours, developed a hitch that made the tread shudder. I learned to pop the side panel and coax the belt back into rhythm with a flathead from my cart. I stopped checking the manager's floor plan. The one under my feet was more accurate. You can live like that for weeks between worlds if you keep your head down and your hands busy. But it doesn't last. Once I followed a thread of gray footprints into a corridor I hadn't cleaned before. No stores, just doors, unmarked, 6 to a side, a mirror at the end like the eye of a needle. My mop left no shine here. My breath smoked even though the mall was warm. I turned to go and found the way behind me longer than the way I'd walked in. The mirror at the far end reflected a man still pushing smaller, until all that moved was a speck of silver dragging a darker silver through a world made of echoes. "Leave that wing to night management," a voice said beside me, calm and professional. The woman had appeared without footsteps with the quiet of a well-trained clerk. She wore a name tag with no name. Her smile was the blank pleasantness of retail everywhere. "Inventory is delicate." I didn't ask what sort. I backed, my cart out like a gentleman exiting a crowded elevator, and felt the corridor release me with a flex, like a muscle unclenching. After that, the mall recognized me. Not just the shoppers who nodded as they stepped aside, not just the clerks who left notes about spills, but the building itself. Air handlers eased their strain as I passed. A flickering ballast held steady while I changed the bulb. The floor under my squeegee found a faster dry. I learned the schedules of doors that were only doors after midnight, the intervals of the phantom restrooms, the hour the empty frames store hushed to listen for something I couldn't hear. And then the living started noticing the wrong things about me. A barista on the morning shift squinted when I ordered a coffee and asked if I'd been painting. I realized my hands were dusted with a powder the sink couldn't wash away. A daytime security guard joked, then didn't, about me smelling like the closed stores. A cold tang like coin and snow. In the mirror by the service corridor, I'd stand and watch my posture bend to the malls. Chin slightly lowered so you can watch for spills, steps short enough to stop without sliding. Eyes softened to accept the way aisles reconfigure themselves when the lights dim. I tried to take a day shift to reset my clock. My body wouldn't do it. Noon made me nauseous. The crowding chatter of day shoppers rattled me like coins in a dryer. At 10 p.m., breathing easy again in the hush, I found a linen cart parked outside the jewelry store and a note pinned to the cloth. "Tonight we host a sale. Kindly polish the cases that are not there." I knew exactly which cases those were. I ate at the Phantom food court more often, black coffee that wasn't, a hot soup that could have been steam, and felt it settle in me with a rightness regular food lacked. I tried to quit. I wrote the email, drafted the excuse, even loaded my cart into the custodial closet with a reverence that embarrassed me. The building sighed. Yes, sighed, as if I'd pulled a bandage from a half-healed wound. The lights over the north concourse went out in a soft synchrony. The custodial sink choked, gurgled, cleared. In the silence that followed, a child laughed out of sight 2 corridors away. 3 small notes that cut my heart like a paper edge. Delight, delight, delight. I stayed. The mall thanked me. Promotions arrived in ways only a night place can give them. My routes became keys. My keys became invitations. I learned the spill kit for the store that sold experiences was not for liquids. I learned the memory of gum clings longer than gum itself, and that scraping it is a skill you can teach a ghost hand. The clerk without a name began greeting me with "Good evening, Mr. Mendoza," and leaving where customers would not see, bottle caps that fit no bottle I have ever used. Once, on a Sunday when the outside world wore a storm like a fur, a manager I had never met stood with me at the balcony rail over the sleeping carousel that arrived only in January. He had a suit the exact color of card receipts and a watch that ticked on the half-second. "We've been needing a man who understands both floors," he said. "Day gloss, night grain." His smile didn't reach his eyes any more than Ron's had. "We could call this a special services role. Hours as they happen. Pay as it must." He named a number that made my ribs ache with relief. "There's paperwork?" I asked, because the living still ask, and he made a gesture with his hand like erasing chalk. "Consider it done." The day mall pretended not to know me after that. The morning barista never remembered the order I'd made for 6 months. The anchor store manager stopped making small talk. The day guard began choosing a different route when he saw me coming. But the night mall, my mall, grew busy. The frames store added a second aisle for frames that hold nothing yet. The memory place extended into the corridor I had been warned away from. Now sometimes, I catch the tremble of a whisper there like pages turning in a cold library. The food court developed a breakfast rush at 4:40 a.m., a crowd of workers in uniforms that look like shadows wearing aprons. If I stand very still, I can hear the jangle of change in their pockets, the creak of doors that aren't on this level. At home, my son gets packages with no return address, tiny souvenirs that vanish in daylight, an arcade token with no print, a zipper pull shaped like a letter we don't use. He keeps them in a shoebox and shows them to me at night, wide-eyed, like we're both kids learning a secret. He asks if I like my job. I tell him the truth. I like doing something well that must be done, even if most folks will never see the shine. When the polar night returns, the living store hours stutter and the retail dead pour in like a gentle tide. The mall is bigger than it was and smaller and truer. Sometimes I pass the glass and catch that gray man's face following my mop, and I nod to him, and he nods back. He's steady. He knows the route. If you come at 3 a.m., you might see me, or you might only clock a gleam on tile where no one should be working. Either way, the aisle is ready for you. I am too. We're open. We're always open. Tommy Clearwater had always liked the quiet roads. He'd driven every kind of route in Alaska, from Anchorage rush-hour snow slush to oil rig shuttles through the tundra. But it was the northern routes he loved most. The world felt honest up there, stripped of everything unnecessary. When the winter wind moaned across the flats of Utqiagvik and the horizon folded into the sea, he could almost believe he was the only living thing left on Earth. So when the school district called needing a temporary driver for the polar night season, he didn't hesitate. "You'll be covering the Barrow Ridge line," the dispatcher said. Old route, small crowd, kids from the edge of town. He didn't know how literal that phrase would become. The first day, the world was blue and silent, a kind of daylight that never woke up. His bus idled outside the depot, diesel chugging like a sleeping animal. Frost feathered the windshield, and the thermometer read -37. Inside, the heater groaned, trying to chase off the Arctic's patience. Tommy checked his clipboard. 5 stops, 6 kids, a simple loop. He tapped the dashboard like an old friend and pulled onto the frozen road. The first few stops were uneventful. 2 boys in parkas clambered aboard, faces buried in scarves, mumbling good mornings. A girl named Mina took the seat right behind him, sketching quietly in her notebook. Another boy, small and solemn, never spoke at all. They all looked tired, not just sleepy, but tired, like their bodies were catching up to time itself. Tommy tried to make small talk. "Cold morning, huh?" Silence. Just the creak of vinyl seats, the thrum of the heater, the whisper of snow. At the 4th stop, a lonely crossroads marked by a rusted mailbox and a half-collapsed sign, he saw a child waiting in the snow. No house, no footprints behind her, just a small girl with long black hair and a pink coat faded to gray. She climbed aboard without a word, her boots leaving no wet prints on the floor. "Name?" Tommy asked. She smiled, small and perfect. "Annie." He nodded and jotted it down. When he looked up again, she was sitting halfway back, staring out the window at the endless dark. He didn't think much of it until he dropped them off. The final stop was supposed to be Barrow Elementary, But what loomed out of the darkness wasn't the school he remembered. The building looked older. The paint peeled to gray wood, windows filmed with frost from the inside. A single light flickered above the door. Still, the kids filed out quiet as snow, vanishing into the shadows without a word. Tommy waited for the teacher, but no one came. The air outside shimmered faintly, not from heat but from a kind of vibration like the world was holding its breath. Then the light in the doorway blinked out. When he returned to the depot, the dispatcher frowned at his sheet. "Barrow Elementary's been closed 10 years, Tommy. Storm took out the roof in 2014. You sure you didn't drop at the New Ridge campus?" He swore he hadn't missed a turn. But when they pulled up the map, the route he'd followed wasn't there. The crossroads, the sign, even the stretch of road between the third and fourth stops, all gone. Just snowfields. The next night he considered calling off, but something in him itched for answers. He started the engine at 5:45 a.m., same as before, and the heater came to life with its old familiar sigh. The first few stops were the same. Same kids, same silence. Then at the crossroads again, Annie stood waiting. Same pink coat, same small smile. "You came back," she said softly. "We weren't sure you would." He laughed nervously. "Of course I came back. Gotta make my rounds, huh?" But her expression was strange and almost pitying. "That's good," she murmured. "We've been waiting a long time." As he drove, he noticed new details, frost forming patterns on the windows, curling into shapes like handwriting. When the headlights caught the snowdrifts, he swore he saw faint impressions of feet, dozens, hundreds, pacing just beyond the light. He gripped the wheel tighter. The bus heater hissed and flickered, and for a moment, he thought he smelled something warm and wrong, chalk dust and old paper, like an abandoned classroom. When they reached the school again, it looked worse. Windows broken, snow piled against the door. But this time he saw a light moving inside, a faint glow like a lantern swaying down a hallway. The kids filed off without hesitation, footsteps vanishing into the drifts. Something inside him twisted. He killed the engine and followed them, boots crunching over old ice. The building groaned as he pushed through the door, the smell of dust and mildew choking the air. Inside, the hallways were lined with faded artwork, snow-damp paper angels and slogans painted in cheerful fonts. "Reach for the sky." Learning never ends. The walls hummed faintly beneath the frost. At the end of the hall stood a classroom door with light leaking beneath it. He opened it slowly. The children sat at desks perfectly still, facing the chalkboard. Their faces glowed faintly blue in the dim light. Behind the teacher's desk stood a woman, or something that wore her shape. Her eyes were sunken, her smile stiff and kind. "Thank you, Mr. Clearwater," she said. "They've missed their lessons." He tried to speak, but his throat locked. The air tasted like old snow. "Don't be afraid," she added gently. "They're only waiting for the day to come again. And until then, we keep learning." Her hand touched his arm, ice cold through his jacket. "You'll come tomorrow, won't you?" They need consistency. When he blinked, he was back in his seat. The bus idling at the depot, dawn's thin gray light pressing through the windshield. His clipboard was empty, his fuel gauge full as if no miles had passed at all. He told himself it was exhaustion, a trick of the endless night. But the next morning, the frost on his windshield spelled out one word, drawn with the small curve of a child's finger. Tomorrow. Tommy tried not to think about it. He told himself the mind plays tricks in long darkness, that a man alone with his thoughts on an endless white road could start seeing things that weren't there. But the handwriting on the windshield kept returning. Each morning it appeared again in frost, one word at a time. Tomorrow. Again. Waiting. The messages were drawn small, as if by tiny hands. He stopped wiping them away after the third week. The bus seemed to hum differently when he left them. The dispatcher didn't notice anything unusual. "Route 14? She asked, flipping through her clipboard. "That line's inactive, Tom. Haven't had kids out there since the flood year." When he showed her the manifest, the handwritten list of stops, the names neatly inked in a looping script, she frowned. "Where'd you get this?" "That's the old roll call. Those kids—" She didn't finish. Just closed the folder and walked away. That night, Tommy went out early before the schedule began. He drove through the sleeping town, headlights slicing through drifting snow. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe the spot where the old road had been erased. But as he passed the outskirts, the darkness deepened, thick as tar. Then just ahead he saw it, the same rusted signpost, the crossroads he shouldn't have found. The road beneath his tires hummed faintly, though he couldn't tell if it was the engine or something deeper. When he reached the first stop, they were already waiting, every one of them. "Morning, Mr. Clearwater," Mina said softly, notebook in hand. Her breath didn't fog the air. "Morning," he muttered, trying not to stare. "You're early. We don't sleep much anymore." The others laughed quietly, the way children do when sharing a secret. Annie, the girl in the pink coat, sat behind him again, swinging her legs. "You kept your promise," she said. "Not everyone does." The heater whined, blowing air that didn't feel warm. He drove, but the landmarks had changed. The snowbanks rose into shapes that almost looked like buildings, and the sky, black as oil, shimmered faintly, as though something enormous moved behind it. The road narrowed, then stretched again, winding through places he didn't remember from any map. "Where are we going today?" he asked, forcing his voice steady. "Same as always," Annie said. "School." He didn't argue. The building appeared at the edge of his headlights. Not where it should have been, not anywhere, really. Its windows glowed like distant lanterns underwater. This time he didn't stop outside. The bus rolled forward on its own, doors sliding open as if guided by unseen hands. The children rose, single file, and began walking down the aisle. As they passed, he noticed things. Frost clinging to their hair like halos, eyes reflecting light that didn't come from the lamps. When Annie reached the steps, she paused. "You can come in today if you want. You've earned it." He wanted to refuse, to drive back, to flee toward the faint orange glow of town lights miles behind him. But something in her tone, not command, not invitation, just certainty, made his fingers release the wheel. Inside, the school was warmer than it should have been. Not heat exactly. Memory of heat, like a stove long extinguished but still smelling faintly of bread. The children took their seats at wooden desks scarred with initials. The teacher stood again at the front of the room, her dress the same shade as the snow outside, her face unreadable. "Mr. Clearwater," she said. "You're right on time." He looked around. The clock on the wall read 2:17, but the second hand didn't move. The windows showed nothing but drifting black. "What is this place?" he whispered. The teacher smiled, though her lips barely moved. "It's still a school. We still have lessons. Some students just take longer to graduate." The children giggled softly. He wanted to back away, but his feet were heavy, as though the floor were holding him in place. "Why me?" he asked. "Why my bus?" "Because you remember them," she said simply. "Most don't. You drove their parents once. You waved to them from the roads. You didn't forget the ones who stopped showing up." She turned to the class, voice soft as falling snow. "Children, today's lesson is kindness." A murmur of delight spread across the room. The air rippled, and for an instant he saw them not as they were, but as they had been. Flushed cheeks, backpacks, pencils tapping on desks. Then the vision flickered, and they were pale again, still and quiet. Annie turned in her seat. "Will you keep driving us?" He wanted to say no to break the spell, but when he looked into her eyes, he saw something infinite. Sadness older than memory. Patience beyond time. "Yes," he heard himself say. "I'll keep driving." "Good," the teacher said. "You're part of the route now." He blinked, and found himself behind the wheel again. The bus idled in motionless snow, headlights dim, gauges dead. The children were gone. Only their backpacks remained on the seats, dusted with frost. He reached back to touch one, and it collapsed into powder, vanishing into the floor vents. When dawn came, he was still sitting there, hands gripping the steering wheel, the frost creeping across the windshield and looping delicate letters. "Thank you." He didn't tell anyone. Not the dispatcher, not the town clerk, not even the priest who sometimes drank with him on Sundays. But people began talking anyway, about a bus seen driving the tundra roads long after midnight, yellow paint glimmering in starlight, the sound of children laughing faintly in the wind. Some said it was a ghost story. Others said Tommy had lost his mind and driven out onto the ice road, never to be found. But every so often, a parent swore they saw tire tracks near the ruins of Barrow Elementary, wide as a bus leading nowhere. And if you listen closely, the wind there doesn't howl the same. It hums, steady and low, like an engine idling. Sometimes at 3:17 a.m. when the polar night wraps the town in total dark, the lights of an old yellow bus drift across the horizon. Inside, silhouettes move, small heads bobbing, hands pressed to windows. And at the wheel sits a man with frost on his beard, watching the road that no longer exists, waiting for the next stop. They say he always slows down when he passes a crossroads, because some passengers are still waiting in the snow. When Jessica Parker first arrived in Nome, she thought the darkness was beautiful. The polar night had just swallowed the horizon, turning the world into a permanent twilight. The air smelled of snow and salt, and the ocean murmured under its armor of ice. She'd worked night shifts before, but this was different. Here, even noon felt like midnight, and the stars never stopped watching. The travel contract promised triple pay, free housing, and a short rotation. 8 weeks, maybe 10, her recruiter had said. You'll barely notice it go by. But on the first night, standing in the parking lot of Nome Regional Hospital, Jessica looked at the endless black stretching in every direction and wondered if time could still move where the sun refused to rise. The hospital itself was a strange comfort. Humming generators, walls too white for the dimness, the sharp tang of antiseptic clinging to every breath. Her supervisor, a thin woman named Marla, met her at the nurse's station with a clipboard and a tired smile. You'll fit right in, she said. You've got that look. Jessica laughed awkwardly. What look? The one people get before they stop asking questions. Her first shift began like any other. Vitals, meds, charting. The patients seemed ordinary enough. Frostbite, pneumonia, infection. But the atmosphere was off. No laughter, no music, no chatter from the staff. The halls stretched too long, each fluorescent light buzzing in a rhythm that didn't match the others. Every clock in the building showed a different time. Around midnight, she checked on room 213, an elderly man named Eli Samrook. His chart said he'd been admitted 2 days earlier for hypothermia, but when she entered, he was sitting up, eyes open, whispering something in a language she didn't know. You're awake, she said gently, adjusting his IV. He nodded slowly. You came back, he murmured. His voice was soft but certain. We were worried you wouldn't. Jessica blinked. I'm sorry, have we met? The old man smiled faintly. Not yet. When she mentioned it to Marla, the supervisor just nodded. He says that to everyone. Don't let it spook you. But later, when she looked at his chart again, she noticed the admission date, January 1979. The page was yellowed, the ink faded. She assumed it was a clerical error. The computers were old, the files older. Still, when she returned to the room, his bed was empty, the sheets perfectly folded. Discharged? She asked at the desk. Marla glanced up from her forms. Who? Eli Samrook, room 2113. There's no one in 2113, she said, and went back to writing. That night, Jessica dreamed of snow, falling inside the corridors, covering the floor in a thick white hush. When she woke, her scrubs smelled faintly of cold air. By the end of the first week, she'd stopped trying to understand the patient list. Every shift, new names appeared and others vanished. None of them matched the town's census records. She heard accents from villages that didn't exist, saw faces that looked centuries apart. They all shared the same expression, the calm patience of people who had nowhere else to go. One woman, her skin translucent as ice, asked for a blanket but flinched when Jessica tucked it under her chin. Too warm, she whispered. It makes the waiting longer. Another patient, a fisherman with salt still crusted on his hands, clutched her wrist when she checked his pulse. Don't listen when they call your name, he said urgently. They don't mean you. What do you mean? She asked. But he was already asleep, or pretending to be. The power went out 2 nights later. It was a routine outage, Marla said, just the wind playing tricks. But when the backup lights flickered on, Jessica saw something move in the far hall. Not a person, more like a shadow with a direction, drifting along the wall, pausing at each door. When it reached the nurse's station, the monitors dimmed, their screens showing static instead of vitals. The shadow bent close to her desk like a figure examining paperwork, then glided away. Afterward, the halls felt heavier. The air tasted metallic, as if the oxygen had gone stale. The patients stopped asking for help. They just watched her move, their eyes reflecting the faint emergency lights. One night, she found Marla in the break room, sitting in the dark, staring at the vending machine. "You ever notice," Marla said quietly, "how they don't die here?" Jessica frowned. "What do you mean?" "Look at your charts. Read the dates. Some of them have been admitted for years. They don't get better, but they don't go either." Jessica wanted to argue, but she couldn't. She'd drawn blood, changed dressings, adjusted oxygen for people who never improved, never worsened, just steady, as if existing was their only condition. "That's impossible," Jessica said. Marla turned to her, eyes tired and hollow. "That's Nomen winter. Nothing dies up here. It just waits for the sun to remember it." When Jessica returned to the ward, every monitor was flatlining. The hall was silent except for the steady, unbroken tone of heart alarms. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Then, one by one, the screens flickered back to life. Every patient breathing normally, every heart still beating. Only her own name tag had changed. The white plastic now read J. Parker, Night Care, Permanent Staff. She didn't remember anyone printing it when she touched it. The tag felt warm, like skin, and somewhere down the corridor, a voice whispered softly from an empty room, "Welcome back." By her second month in Nome, Jessica couldn't remember when she'd last seen daylight, or if she ever really had. The hospital lights hummed perpetually, pale and tired, and the blackness beyond the windows felt less like night and more like an ocean pressing in from every direction. Time unraveled inside those walls. Lunch breaks bled into midnight rounds, and the clocks kept losing minutes they never got back. The only thing that stayed constant was the pulse of the building, the rhythmic drone of generators, the faint whisper of vents breathing, and somewhere deeper, the echo of a heartbeat that didn't belong to any patient. She learned quickly that no one ever left Nome Regional. When patients improved, they were transferred, but their beds were never stripped. New names appeared on the charts, but the handwriting was always the same soft scrawl, looping and unfamiliar. Sometimes she'd walk into a room expecting a certain patient and find someone else there, a man who swore she'd been his nurse for years, or a child who recognized her voice before she spoke. And yet no one looked surprised. It was as though the hospital itself chose who stayed and who replaced them, like a tide trading one soul for another. Jessica began to notice other changes too, in herself. She stopped feeling hunger, but she kept eating out of habit. Coffee no longer woke her. She no longer felt the need to sleep at all. Her reflection in the medicine cabinet seemed delayed, lagging a half-second behind her movements. When she brushed her hand against the frosted windows in the ICU, her fingertips left warmth. Faint, glowing warmth that lingered like candlelight. The patient started whispering to her now. Soft things, fragments of stories. "The snow remembers," said one, an old fisherman with stitches running down his throat. "We come when the tide goes black," murmured another, her voice little more than air. When Jessica asked what they meant, they only smiled faintly. "You'll understand soon." The turning point came when she was called to room 309. The intercom crackled with her name. "Nurse Parker to 309. Please," though she was alone at the station. Room 309 had been empty since her first week. Still she went. The hallway seemed longer than usual, the linoleum gleaming under lights that flickered in a slow, pulsing rhythm. At the door she hesitated. The air felt colder there, heavy enough to breathe like smoke. She pushed it open and found a woman sitting upright in the bed, pale as a sheet, her eyes bright and familiar. It was Marla, or something that wore Marla's face. "I was hoping it would be you," the woman said. "They like you, you know. You make them feel..." Remembered. Jessica's heart stuttered. "What is this? What's happening to us?" Marla's expression softened. "There's no us and them anymore. This place, it's what happens when people can't let go. Some of the patients, some of the staff. We just stay. The hospital takes care of its own." "I'm not staying," Jessica whispered. "I'm leaving. I'm going home." Marla shook her head gently. "You already said that once." Something about her tone made Jessica's stomach twist. "What do you mean once?" "Look at your badge," Marla said. Jessica glanced down. The white plastic tag had darkened, the letters faintly glowing through the surface. J. Parker, Night Care, since 1989. She felt her knees weaken. She was only 27. She hadn't even been born in 1989. Marla's voice was almost kind. Time doesn't move right here. It folds, it forgets. Some of us started as nurses, others as patients, and some as visitors who never left the waiting room. She reached out, fingers ghosting against Jessica's arm. You stayed because you cared. That's what the building needs. Hands that remember how to comfort, how to heal. You feed it with kindness. It keeps you warm. Jessica stepped back, trembling. I'm not dead, Marla smiled sadly. No one here is. Not really. The lights above them flickered and a long, low tone filled the air, like the sound of a heart monitor stretching into infinity. The shadows along the walls deepened, curling into shapes that almost resembled people, silhouettes moving with purpose, whispering softly. Jessica could make out words now, her own name, her patients' names, the endless murmur of gratitude and need. Then she heard the PA system again, though she hadn't touched the controls. Code Winter, Ward C, Nurse Parker to Ward C. Her body moved before her mind did. She knew the way instinctively. Ward C was the oldest wing, half condemned after a storm years ago. The door groaned open into blackness. Inside, the air shimmered faintly like heat rising from snow. Beds lined the walls, dozens of them, occupied by figures in various states of rest. Some breathed. Some didn't. Some flickered in and out like candle flames. The heart of the wing was a single machine, an ancient ventilator surrounded by cables that pulsed with faint white light. And on the bed attached to it lay someone she recognized, herself, her own body. She stared at it, the pale face, the slow, steady rise and fall of the chest. Her ID badge hung from that other uniform too, identical to hers. Accident, Marla said softly behind her. First week of night shift. The ambulance skidded on the ice outside the ER. You never made it inside, not the way you thought. Jessica's mouth went dry. So what am I? You're what every nurse becomes if she cares enough to stay, Marla said. You're the night shift now. Outside, a faint light shimmered on the horizon, the sun trying for the first time in months to rise. The patients stirred, their murmurs rising to a soft hum. Jessica felt warmth flood her palms, a steady rhythm matching the heartbeat in the walls. She turned to Marla, tears freezing on her cheeks. If I stay, will they rest? Marla smiled. For a little while, Jessica nodded once. Then show me the charts. Now locals say Nome Regional never truly closes. In winter, the building glows faintly, even during blackouts. Travelers speak of a nurse walking the halls, gentle voice, warm hands, eyes reflecting the faintest hint of sunrise. Patients say she comes to them in their sleep, checking vitals that no machine records. They call her the nurse of no sunlight, the one who never stops working, because in that endless night, someone always needs her. Dave Chen had always trusted machines more than people. Pipes didn't lie. Gauges didn't gossip. Pressure and flow, those were truths a man could measure. That was why he took the contract nobody else wanted. 6 months of maintenance work along the Trans-Alaska pipeline during the polar night. It was good money, triple overtime, isolation pay. The kind of job that could clear debt and buy a future. 600 miles of steel, his supervisor had told him. Keep it warm, keep it moving. The oil stops, Alaska freezes, simple enough. But the cold out there wasn't natural. It wasn't the kind that bit. It watched. The first month passed quietly. His work crew was reduced to 3. Dave, a soft-spoken tech named Hollis, and a weathered mechanic called Red. Their base camp sat along a lonely stretch near Pump Station 7, surrounded by snow that never seemed to settle the same way twice. The line ran like a black serpent through the tundra, elevated on stilts, carrying oil that steamed faintly in the endless dark. The Artery of the North, Red called it, tapping the pipe. And we're the blood keepers. Dave kept the system alive, reading pressures, inspecting valves, clearing ice. He slept little, ate less, his world narrowing to the hum of metal and the low moan of wind. Sometimes, during patrols, he swore he heard something moving beneath the permafrost, a sound like slow breathing under the snow. Hollis joked it was methane pockets shifting, but once, when Dave pressed a glove to the ground, he felt warmth, faint, rhythmic like a heartbeat. Could be geothermal, Hollis said. This whole state's sitting on angry earth. Yeah, Red muttered. But geothermal don't whisper your name. Dave laughed uneasily, but that night, lying in his bunk, he heard it. Soft, drawn out, a voice murmuring through the heater vents. Dave. Come below, he blamed fatigue. The sun hadn't risen in weeks. Men start seeing ghosts when their body forgets the difference between midnight and morning, but the warmth under the ground kept growing. His thermal readings along the pipeline showed hotspots moving, not stationary, crawling, inching along the buried sections. He logged it, sent reports. The reply from Anchorage came 2 days later. Sensor error. Recalibrate and continue. On the 7th week, Red didn't come back from inspection. His radio crackled with static and something wet underneath it, a gurgling, slurping noise that made Dave's stomach turn. They found his flashlight 30 yards from the line, half buried in snow, its lens melted into a blistered oval. Hollis said maybe he fell through thin ice, but there was no hole, no tracks, no blood, just a shallow depression where the snow had collapsed inward, as though something had breathed out from below. The next day, the pipeline pressure spiked. Gauges slammed red across the board. Dave opened a relief valve and smelled something wrong. Not oil, but something sweet and metallic like blood boiled in salt water. The air around the pipe shimmered with heat. Steam rose through the snow and the smell deepened. Beneath his boots, the ground trembled. That night, the camp lights flickered. The generator groaned and went dark. When Dave stepped outside, the sky was alive, green curtains of aurora twisting like serpents. The pipeline gleamed beneath it, vibrating faintly. The snow by the supports had begun to melt, and in the puddles something moved. Shapes. Small, glistening shapes like the size of rats, but boneless, translucent, pulsing with faint light. They slithered toward the steel supports, pressing against them like moths to a flame. Steam hissed where their flesh touched the metal. He lifted his flashlight. The beam hit one directly, and it turned its head. It had a head. No eyes, just a slit that widened into a trembling hole, gasping softly as if tasting the air. Dave staggered back, nearly slipping. The creature detached from the pipe, leaving a smear that sizzled. It flopped twice on the snow, then melted into a puddle that hissed and vanished. The smell that followed was unmistakable. Crude oil. He ran inside, slammed the door, and found Hollis standing by the window, white as chalk. "They're all over," he whispered. "You see 'em too, right?" "I thought I was losing it." He pointed outside. Through the frosted glass, the snow seemed to move, hundreds of faint, pulsing shapes writhing in slow rhythm, converging along the line. "What the hell are they?" Dave muttered. "Doesn't matter," Hollis said. "They want heat. The pipeline's their goddamn buffet." Dave turned to the monitors. The pressure readings were dropping, then spiking again, as though something massive was feeding inside the line. "They're in the system," he said. "Jesus Christ, they're inside the oil flow." Hollis laughed, a short, broken sound. "Then what happens when it reaches Valdez? When they hit open air?" Dave didn't answer. The aurora outside brightened until the snow glowed like emerald fire. The hum of the line deepened to a low, throbbing pulse. The creatures pressed tighter to the pipeline, as if worshipping it, and for the first time, Dave saw them clearly, thousands, maybe more, all writhing toward the same direction. "The line's not feeding oil anymore," Hollis whispered. "It's feeding them." That night, the radio buzzed with static. A voice came through, distant and hollow. "Station 7, respond. Temperature anomaly confirmed. Proceed to vent shaft Epsilon for inspection." Dave froze. Epsilon was 40 miles north, a dead section sealed for decades. The voice repeated, but beneath it, layered faintly in the static, came a second voice. Soft, wet, whispering through the line itself. "Come below." The ground outside shuddered, a low rumble rolling across the tundra. Snow cracked. A wave of heat blasted from beneath the ice, carrying the smell of oil and blood. The pipeline had begun to breathe. The storm hit at dusk, though dusk didn't mean much this far north. The horizon had been black for months, the sky a slow, swirling bruise of green light. Dave and Hollis spent the night checking gauges by lantern, the wind howling through the frame of the maintenance shed like a throat trying to speak. Every hour the pipeline shuddered, a hollow metallic groan that echoed across the tundra. It was alive now, breathing in a rhythm no machine should have. "Epsilon shafts calling," Hollis muttered, staring at the radio. It had been repeating the same message every 20 minutes, the same dry voice, "Inspection required." "Proceed immediately." Static filled the spaces between the words, but sometimes, hidden deep inside it, came something else. A wet, shuddering whisper, the sound of a mouth forming syllables. Dave couldn't make out the words, but he could feel them under his skin. When the third generator failed, they decided to go. The power outages weren't random anymore. Something was draining them, drinking the warmth out of every line. They packed their cold suits, flare guns, and a portable thermal sensor, then followed the pipeline north by Snowcat. The oil artery stretched ahead like a black vein through the frozen land. For the first few miles, everything looked normal. The gauges blinked steady green. The metal gleamed under frost. Then the readings began to climb again, not cold but heat. The thermal scope painted the world in false color. The snow burned bright red in patches. It's like the ground itself was bleeding warmth. Geothermal my ass, Hollis muttered. They reached the Epsilon shaft just after 2 a.m. It shouldn't have been there. The site was supposed to be sealed in '89 after a rupture. Yet the hatch stood open. Frost melted clean away around the edges. Warm air drifted out, humid, heavy, and wrong. It smelled like rotten oil, like something had been fermenting under the ice for centuries. Dave stared into the opening. A staircase spiraled down into red light. "We have to log it," he said. "If something's feeding on the heat, we need proof." Hollis grinned weakly. "You first, hero." The descent took minutes that felt like hours. The deeper they went, the warmer it became. Their breath stopped fogging and beads of sweat froze along their eyelashes before melting again. The walls dripped black, not water but something thicker, pulsing in time with the distant heartbeat they'd been hearing through the pipe for weeks. When they reached the bottom, the corridor opened into a cavern that shouldn't have existed, a hollow bubble in the ice glowing with faint orange light. In its center stood a column of exposed pipeline, cut open like a wound. The oil wasn't oil anymore. It moved like muscle, black and wet, contracting gently as it flowed. "Jesus Christ," Hollis whispered. "It's alive!" Something stirred inside the column. A bulge rose and slid downward, like something moving through a throat. Then it pushed free, a shape slick with tar and heat crawling onto the ice. It had no eyes, no bones, only the shimmer of translucent skin over pulsing organs. When it opened its mouth, Dave saw the reflection of flame inside. Hollis fired a flare out of panic. The creature screamed, not in pain but in reply, and the sound came from everywhere. The walls around them rippled. Dozens of shapes moved beneath the ice, pressing against the surface like unborn things waiting to hatch. "Run!" Dave shouted. They scrambled back toward the staircase, but the path was slick with oil. Hollis slipped, falling hard. The tar surged over his legs, climbing like hands. He screamed, clawing at the rail, but the substance clung to him, dragging him downward. "Don't let go!" Dave yelled, gripping his arm. Hollis's face twisted, his breath a plume of steam. "It's warm," he gasped. "It's so warm." Then his body went limp. The thing beneath the oil pulled, and he was gone. Dave climbed, hands burning where the metal rail seared with heat. The light from his helmet flickered, catching glimpses of movement in the tunnel walls. Slick shapes pressing against the steel, their bodies sliding upward, chasing him. He burst through the hatch into open air, slamming it shut behind him, his lungs freezing with every gulp of wind. The ground trembled under his boots, a low, continuous vibration that didn't stop. When he looked back, he saw it, steam rising in columns along the line, the snow boiling. The oil wasn't being pumped anymore, and it was flowing back. He could feel the reversal in the hum of the metal. Whatever was beneath the ice wasn't just feeding on the pipeline. It was claiming it, using it. Dave made it back to Station 7 alone. The camp was dark. The Snowcat sat half-buried, its metal warped as though something hot had crawled across it. Inside, the walls were smeared with a black residue that shimmered faintly under his flashlight. The generator's temperature gauge read 137 degrees Fahrenheit. Impossible in that cold. He found Red's old logbook on the table. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before Red disappeared. They're using the line. Not for oil, for warmth. The feed keeps them sleeping. If we stop it, they'll wake. If we keep it running, they'll grow. As Dave read, the ground shook again. The hum rose to a deep, resonant moan, and from the window he saw the line splitting open miles away. A geyser of black liquid spraying into the air, glowing red at its core. The heat hit his face seconds later. The creatures were surfacing now, crawling from the rupture like larvae from a carcass, their forms glistening in the aurora. He grabbed the emergency transmitter. Control, this is Station 7. Shut it down. Shut down the entire line. It's not oil, it's alive. Static. Then a voice answered, calm and mechanical. Acknowledged. Cycle complete. System integrity is stable. He stared at the radio, realization sinking in like frostbite. The voice wasn't Anchorage. It wasn't human at all. The pipeline had been speaking back. Outside, the heat intensified. The creatures turned toward the sound of the station, drawn to the warmth of his breath, his heartbeat. He felt the floor tremble under their weight. In the distance, he could see the line glowing like an artery under skin, carrying its molten life south toward the sea. Dave climbed the tower and looked out over the horizon. For the first time, the night sky was burning, streaks of green, red, and gold twisting together, the aurora pulsing in rhythm with the earth itself. He could feel it in his chest, the heartbeat of something ancient and vast awakened after centuries of ice. He turned on the floodlights, every bulb screaming to life. The creatures paused, bathing in the glow, shivering in ecstasy. Dave reached for the emergency valve and smiled grimly. "You want heat?" he whispered. "Here's your feast." He slammed the switch. The gas lines ignited. The world went white. In the months that followed, rescuers found nothing but warped metal and glass fused into black slag. Station 7 was written off as a methane explosion. The pipeline reopened quietly, rerouted and repaired, but truckers still whisper that when the aurora flares brightest, the ground near Epsilon hums, warm enough to melt boot soles. And sometimes, just before dawn, you can see steam rising from the permafrost like the breath of something sleeping deep below. They say it's still there, beneath the ice in the ancient heart that drinks the world's heat and the pipeline. It's not transporting oil anymore. It's keeping the dark alive. Lisa Martinez had seen strange things in her years as a seafood quality inspector, but nothing prepared her for the winter Dutch harbor brought. The Aleutian wind came in waves that felt alive, breathing through the cracks of the processing plant and making the fluorescent lights sway like ghost lanterns. The sea never slept here. Even when the world froze solid, the gray water churned and muttered like something restless. "The ocean's a stomach," the old hand said. "It eats everything and still hungers." Lisa had laughed when she first heard that. She stopped laughing the night Amelia Rose came in. She was finishing the midnight paperwork when the harbor alarm sounded, a long, low blast meant for fog alerts. The docks were empty. No ships were scheduled until dawn. Still, when she looked out the office window, she saw it. A trawler emerging from the mist, lights flickering yellow through the fog. It moved too smoothly, like it was gliding instead of cutting through water. The name stenciled on the hull, Amelia Rose, was half-eaten by rust. Lisa recognized it immediately. The ship had vanished off the coast of Attu in 1982, lost with all 8 crewmen. She'd seen the name in maritime records years ago. The vessel docked in silence. No crew called out. No engines idled. Just the sound of metal creaking against the pier. The radio crackled once with static, then a voice, faint and hollow. "Catch for inspection," that was all. The voice didn't sound like any man she'd ever heard. It was distant, filtered through water. She should have called security. Instead, habit took over. She pulled on her coat and hard hat, clipboard in hand, and went down to the docks. The air smelled wrong. Not fishy, not salty, sweet like iron and decay. The hold was already open when she climbed aboard. The catch glistened under the deck lights piled high in tangled nets. Fish, or something that had once been fish, pale, translucent, their eyes black and unfocused. Some still twitched, though the deck was cold enough to freeze flesh solid. Lisa knelt beside one and touched its scales. It pulsed faintly under her glove. When she withdrew her hand, a smear of black fluid followed, thick and oily. It clung to her skin, and she swore she heard it hiss softly as though whispering. She wiped it on her pants, heart hammering, and stumbled back. A voice rose behind her. "Quality control already?" "You're dedicated." It was Garth, the night supervisor, tall, bald, with a smoker's laugh that echoed off the metal walls. "Who brought this in?" she asked. "Didn't see anyone," he said. "Tied itself up, maybe." She stared at him, waiting for a smirk that never came. The next morning, the plant crew began processing the catch. They worked in silence, knives flashing under flickering lights. The fish bled black into the drainage grates, the smell turning the air heavy and metallic. By the time the sun, or what passed for it, rose, the floor was slick with oil-dark blood. The conveyor belts jammed 3 times. Each time, when the blades cut through, something like a sigh drifted up from the drains below. Lisa tried to file the incident, but the office network refused to send. The message bounced back with a simple error. Recipient does not exist. That afternoon, another trawler arrived, the Seraphine. It too had vanished decades ago, and like the Amelia Rose, it carried a full load of fish that twitched even after gutting. The men on the line whispered that the sea was coughing up its ghosts. One worker, Jose, swore he saw shapes moving under the ice, long, sinuous forms trailing tendrils like hair. "They're singing," he told Lisa, eyes wide. "You just can't hear it yet." The next night, Jose didn't show up for shift. They found his gloves on the dock, still wet. That was when Lisa noticed the change in the crew. Their eyes, their skin. Garth's pupils had shrunk to pinpoints, his veins faintly visible under a sheen of gray. One of the cutters, a woman named Sarah, had small fissures forming behind her ears. When Lisa asked if she was all right, Sarah smiled too wide. "Fine," she said. "The salt helps. Keeps the voice away." "What voice?" "The one under the floor." That night, Lisa stayed after shift, checking the storage freezers. The fish were stacked neatly in crates, frost gathering along their glassy skin. When she opened the door to freezer 6, the lights flickered. She froze. Inside, the boxes were empty, but the walls were breathing. Frost expanded and contracted in slow rhythm, and faintly beneath the hum of the generator came a sound. Whispering. Dozens of voices speaking just below hearing. She stepped closer. One word emerged clearly through the hiss. "Return." The wall cracked, splitting in a thin black line that pulsed with warmth. She stumbled back, slamming the door. By morning, the harbor was full of ships, some modern, some rusted relics from the past century, all riding low in the water, their hulls black with oil. No crews, no lights, no engines, just the creak of waves and the soft sound of nets dragging across the docks. Inside the plant, the power failed. The machine stopped. The emergency lights turned the halls red. The workers didn't panic. They simply stood still, heads tilted toward the floor, listening. Garth smiled when Lisa found him by the cutting line. His teeth were black. "It's feeding time," he said. And then the pipes began to groan and the drains began to breathe. By dawn, the harbor was gone. Or rather, it was different. The fog had thickened into a wall of gray, a moving tide that swallowed the horizon. The water no longer lapped against the docks. It pulsed, rising and falling in deep rhythmic waves, like the slow breathing of some vast creature beneath. The fleet of ghost ships drifted in lazy circles, hulls scraping softly against one another, and from their holds came a low, wet humming. It wasn't the wind. It was too steady, too intentional. Lisa stood at the plant's main window watching. She hadn't slept. The whole facility smelled of rust and rot now, the air thick with a tang that coated the back of her throat. The other workers had changed completely. They no longer wore their coats or gloves. Their skin was pallid, slick with condensation, and their eyes reflected light like fish scales. They didn't speak much, just whispered fragments, rhythmic as if chanting under their breath. When she walked by, they would turn to her and nod with small, knowing smiles. "Almost ready," Garth said when she asked what was happening. His voice carried a strange reverb, like multiple versions of him speaking at once. "The sea's hungry, Lisa. It's been starving since we started taking without giving back. We thought we were feeding families, but we were only feeding it." She backed away slowly. "You're sick," she said. "All of you," he laughed softly. "Not sick, cleansed. We're remembering what we came from." When the foghorn sounded again, it wasn't from any ship. It came from the water itself, low and deep, rolling through the air and vibrating the walls of the plant. The floor under her boots trembled. Somewhere below, the drainage system began to hiss. The smell of salt and decay rushed upward through the vents. Lisa ran to the control room and hit the emergency generator. The fluorescent lights flickered to life, and that's when she saw it. The drains were overflowing. Not with water, not even with oil, but with flesh. Translucent cords like strands of kelp were pushing up from the grates, slick and glistening, each pulsing faintly with inner light. They slithered across the floor, coiling toward the workers' boots. No one moved to stop them. They simply stood there, smiling faintly as the tendrils wrapped around their ankles, their wrists, their throats. Lisa screamed and bolted down the hallway. The lights overhead popped one by one. plunging the corridors into stuttering red shadows. Behind her, she could hear them laughing. Not human laughter, but a gurgling liquid sound like bubbles rising through mud. She grabbed her radio. "Coast Guard, this is Dutch Harbor Processing, emergency situation. Unknown contamination event, possible biological hazard." Only static answered. Then faintly, "Return." She stopped cold. That voice wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from the walls. A groan reverberated through the building. The walls themselves were sweating, beads of black liquid rolling down the paint. The air tasted like copper and brine. She stumbled into the cold storage corridor again, slamming the freezer doors shut one after another, trying to trap the whispering inside. But the sound didn't fade. It followed her, muffled through the steel, dozens of voices chanting in unison, "Return, return, return," and then silence. She turned. The emergency door to the dock stood open. Beyond it, the fog churned like boiling milk. Something massive moved within it, dark and slow. She could see the outlines of the old trawlers drifting closer, their decks crawling with shapes that weren't men. They were covered in scales that shimmered faintly green, with limbs that bent too many ways. The air rippled around them like heat. The sea was delivering its harvest. Lisa stumbled backward into the processing bay. The tanks that once held fish were now full of black ichor bubbling gently. The workers surrounded them, dipping their hands into the sludge and smearing it across their chests. Garth stepped forward, his grin impossibly wide, his teeth dark and glistening. "Don't fight it," he said. "The ocean's just taking back what belongs to her." "She's waited long enough." "Who's she?" Lisa whispered. "The first tide," he murmured. "The one that fed the world before it learned to breathe air. We've been cutting her children open for centuries. Did you think she'd forget?" The floor buckled beneath them with a sickening crack. Seawater, and something thicker, rushed in through the drains. The lights exploded overhead, showering sparks into the rising flood. The black water surged up to Lisa's knees, warm, pulsing with faint internal luminescence. In it, she could see faces, hundreds of them, floating just below the surface. Some she recognized from the crew, others were too old, too eroded, their eyes wide and gleaming. Garth sank to his knees in the water, arms raised. "She forgives!" he cried. "She forgives." The tendrils burst from the water, wrapping around his torso, lifting him effortlessly. His body convulsed once, twice, and then melted, merging with the liquid. His voice joined the whispering below. Lisa fought her way toward the upper stairwell, the heat rising around her like fever. At the top, she turned for one last look. The plant was gone, its walls dissolving, its steel girders twisting inward as if drawn by gravity. In the center of the bay, something vast was surfacing. A mass of tendrils, scales, and luminous eyes the size of windows. It opened what might have been a mouth, and the sound that came out wasn't a roar but a sigh. A deep, sorrowful exhalation that made the sea itself bow in reply. She ran. Out into the snow, across the frozen lot, the fog chasing her like a living thing. Behind her, the harbor split apart, ships crumpling like paper as the ocean surged upward, reclaiming its stolen flesh. Lisa didn't stop until the sound faded. She collapsed on the ridge overlooking the coast, gasping, her clothes soaked with black ichor. The horizon glowed faintly green, reflecting something moving beneath the surface of the sea. The whisper followed her still, carried on the wind, a lullaby older than language. She made it to Anchorage 3 days later, barefoot and raving. The Coast Guard found her wandering the docks, whispering to the sea. Her skin was clammy, her veins dark with a faint shimmer beneath. In her pockets, they found fish scales that were warm to the touch and still pulsing. Now, in Dutch Harbor, locals say the fog sings on certain nights. The catches glow faintly in their nets, and sometimes when the tide recedes you can see footprints, human, but webbed, leading from the water back to the plant's ruins. They say Lisa still walks the shore, eyes black as oil, whispering to the waves. And if you listen closely, the waves whisper back, "We remember." Marcus Williams used to like the quiet of his route, the way the Arctic night pressed soft as velvet against the windshield, the way the heater hummed like a tame animal while the snow hissed beneath his tires. He'd learned the halo of every porchlight in town, could tell which steps would groan and which dogs would bark, could navigate a blizzard by muscle memory, and the faint trace of yesterday's tracks. The polar night didn't bother him. It just made the world simple: drive, deliver, scan, repeat. People trusted him with their birthdays and their medicines and the fragile things they didn't want to risk to mail. He wore that trust like a warm coat. It was the second week of December when the handheld first glitched. A new stop appeared after his last one. 0 Frostline Santi. 03:17 a.m. Signature required. He frowned. There was no Frostline court in his town. He zoomed the map. The cursor floated in an unplatted patch between the river and the old cannery road, a white zone the GPS usually ignored. He could have ignored it too, flagged it as bad address, returned to station, written it off as some half-finished subdivision the county never blessed. But the handheld pinged again. Not the usual chime, but a soft knock. 3 taps that vibrated through his palm like bones on hollow wood. He told himself it was a soundpack update, shrugged, and turned off the main road toward the river. The snow deepened to matte velvet, swallowing his headlights in a gray hush. The world narrowed to the cone of light ahead, and the low numbers ticking on the dash clock. 03:13, 03:14. By 03:16, the river fog had thickened to wool. When he crested the bend, the fog thinned, and there it was. A short, crisp cul-de-sac punched out of nothing. 5 new houses under the aurora's sick green glow. Fresh siding, dark windows, tidy. Porches with railings that still smelled of hardware store pine. A street sign, Frostline CT, stood straight and sure, a little too clean for a town that sandblasted everything to gray in a week. The scanner chirped like it finally recognized the world. Huh, Marcus said, because he couldn't say no. Not to a rectangle of night that looked exactly like somewhere people lived. He pulled to the curb and grabbed the small box. Weightless light like something hollow with a heart. The label read, Walter 0 Frostline CT. Delivery confidence, absolute. 0, he said to the empty cab, and laughed, because the cold makes men tender with their own dumb jokes. The porch boards didn't creak. The snow on the steps didn't squeal. He knocked. The door opened a thumb's width without a latch turning, just the gentle intake of a house that's been expecting company. The warmth inside wasn't heat. It was the memory of heat, like a sweater baked in an old sun. A shape stood in the hall, not a man, not a shadow, something between. It had the outline of shoulders and the patient tilt of someone who knew his name already. Marcus held up his scanner like a crucifix. Signature? The shape extended. A hand the way the dark extends itself, politely, as if to say after you. The stylus hovered, then moved, and on the glass bloomed a signature. Walter, written neat in a schoolteacher's hand. The box was lighter when Marcus let it go. The door closed with the soft sigh of paper settling. His scanner flashed delivered and appended a note he didn't type. Thank you. He drove back to the depot on roads he knew, unloaded, clocked out, went home. He slept badly. 3 nights later, another address populated at 03:11. 2 Frostline sent. Locker drop, porch bench. He told the loader to stop kidding around. The loader said the software generated stops from scan labels upstream. Nothing to do with him. Some new build, the loader said. County's slow to update. Happens. Marcus told himself the same thing and went back. There were 7 houses now. He parked in front of 2, gray siding, a porch bench with slats still sharp-edged from the mill, and set the parcel down. The bench sagged a fraction, like the weight mattered in a world where nothing else did. Behind the curtain, something watched him with the kind of patience that burns. He didn't wave. Shadows don't need hellos. On the 5th delivery, the handheld added a familiar name, 14 Frostline Cinti, Marta W. His wife's name. The label matched his own last name, matched the number of their real house across town. He sat in the cab for a full minute listening to the radiator tick as it cooled. When he scanned the barcode, the device added, "Do not open," without prompting. He drove to Frostline anyway. The cul-de-sac had lengthened into a loop, and the loop sprouted side streets. Every time he returned, there were more houses, duplicates of homes he knew, not exactly the same, but close enough to trigger déjà vu, a floor plan half a step off. He found 14 with sick certainty. The porch light glowed the precise honey white of the LED he and Marta bickered about installing. The door was painted the blue she'd wanted last spring. He set the parcel down and fled with the polite haste of a man who can feel the weight of eyes. At home, the kitchen clock was 3 minutes behind. Power must have flickered, Marta said. She rubbed her temples. I've had the worst headache all day right here. 2 knuckles pressed into her eyebrows like she was trying to pinch out a splinter. He almost told her about the delivery. He almost told her that when he closed, their real front door, he'd felt an echo. A second door closing a breath later somewhere not on their street. He didn't. Instead, he started to notice things. The map in his scanner updated itself in the idle hour. Streets unspooled to the east where tundra used to be. Names creeped in like frost. Frostline Keat, Permafrost Way, Candleice Len. The labels carried notes. Preferred delivery window, 03, 03, 33. Residents sleep daylight hours. On night 7, he met a child on the sidewalk, a girl about 8 years old wearing a parka that swallowed her chin. She didn't fog the air when she breathed. Sir, she said very politely. My mom says the medicine's late. What medicine? He asked stupidly, clutching a padded mailer addressed to 3 Frostline that weighed only as much as a promise. The one that keeps us warm, she said, and held the door for him. He hesitated. Behind the girl, a hallway, stretched farther than it should, lined with family photos in frames that showed faces he recognized from town, slightly wrong. Every mouth a little too tidy, every eye a fraction too dark, every smile held a beat after it should have relaxed. He set the envelope on the console table, and the table pulsed like the memory of a heartbeat. When he left, the girl said, "Thank you, Mr. Williams." He'd never told her his name. In the depot, he began finding envelopes with no return address, and a familiar hand on the label, his own. They were addressed to streets that didn't exist yet. He started marking them exception, address unknown, and stacking them on the reject shelf. Each morning, the shelf was empty. Night sorter must have cleared it, the manager said. We don't have a night sorter, Marcus answered. The manager blinked like he'd forgotten. At 03:17, the scanner chimed. Bulk drop 26 stops auto-optimized. The route line on the map braided into a figure 8 that laid itself over the shape of town like tracing paper. Each stop landed on a mirror of a house he knew. Neighbors, co-workers, the pastor, the lady who fed ravens. Addresses increased by a number he couldn't count. Every parcel he placed caused the street to lengthen, the cul-de-sacs to split, the shadows to thicken at the edges where the light ran out. He drove through a town that loved him back with the relentless courtesy of a machine. Doors opening just enough, signatures appearing when he needed them, the handheld thanking him in a voice that used to be his dispatcher's and now sounded like a hallway saying welcome. He told himself he could stop any time. He told himself he would. He tried to stop on a Tuesday because Tuesdays felt honest. Nothing magical happens on a Tuesday, not even in the Arctic. He keyed return to station after his last legitimate stop and let the scanner's new address blink without his attention. The device pulsed in his palm anyway, a soft throb that matched his pulse. He tossed it onto the passenger seat like a misbehaving pet and took the roundabout by the river that would carry him home. The street lamp at the bend flickered twice and died. His headlights picked up the white rectangle of a road sign he'd never seen there before. Detour, Frostline Loop. Not county font. Too clean. He laughed once and kept going. The engine coughed. The dash went black. The van rolled to a polite stop as if an invisible foot had pressed the brake. The scanner lit on the seat beside him with a glow not quite electrical. Critical delivery, 03:17. The cab felt suddenly crowded, the way rooms feel right before company arrives. He picked up the device without meaning to, the way you reach to silence a crying child. Fine, he said to no one. One stop. The road unspooled like ribbon, and he let it. Frostline had grown. Not just more houses and more town. A school with lights off but swings moving. a post office with a flag that hung like a tongue, a church whose bell tolled without making a sound. Every building was a cousin to something he knew. Names shifted a letter. Faces in the windows 1 degree to the left of real. The scanner ticked through stops without prompting. 9 frost line, pantry restock, a box that smelled like bread hot from an oven that didn't burn. 11 permafrost, wardrobe, cloth that whispered against the tape as if it had lungs. 17 candle ice. Heat, a parcel that glowed faintly and warmed his wrist through the cardboard. With each delivery, the street ahead sharpened, more houses condensing from fog like breath on glass. And the people, not just silhouettes now. They met him at the door, polite to a fault, faces tidy with gratitude. "Evening, Mr. Williams." "Long night, Marcus." "You're a blessing to this community." He'd heard the same phrases on his day route, but the words here landed with a pressure that left a bruise. At 14 Frostline, his blue door waited. He stood on the step a long time while the aurora stitched and unstitched itself overhead. He lifted his hand to knock at a house that wasn't his and would always be exactly his. The door opened the width of a decision. Marta stood in the hall in the sweater she slept in when the furnace acted up, mouth parted as if to call his name. Her eyes were wrong. Not black, not empty, just set back farther in the dark like she was standing 1 pace into another room. "You're late," she said with relief so clean it almost cut him. "I thought the package wouldn't come." He held the box like it might bite. The label read Marta W. Keep sealed until needed. "What is it?" he asked. She smiled. The same fraction too long smile as the picture frames in 3 Frostline. "Warmth," she said. "For when the world forgets us again." Behind her, down the hall, photos of their life hung in perfect order, each a degree colder than the one beside it. He set the box on the console and fled before the echo of his own footsteps could catch up. He didn't go home, not yet. Home had 2 addresses now, and he wasn't ready to choose which bell to answer. He parked at the overlook above town where the real street slalomed beneath the slope, and the false ones lay superimposed like veins. From up there, the difference was obvious. Daylight roads grayed to nothing, while Frostline and its kin shone with a gentle, steady luminance, as if each porch contained a small hearth that didn't need fire. In the van's rear view, the cargo bay seemed fuller than it should be. Boxes glimmered with that same low light, and labels rearranged themselves without hands. Back orders fulfilled. New residents added, coverage expanded. He turned the key. The engine started like it forgave him. He pointed the van toward the depot, ready to confess everything to the manager, to throw the scanner in the snow and crush it with his boot, to submit to the ordinary cruelty of forms. At the first intersection, a stop sign he'd known since high school bore an extra word in the reflective red: "Deliver." He rolled down the window and touched the metal. The letters were raised, embossed right into the paint. He laughed too loud and drove past. The depot was brighter than it should have been after hours. The bay door was open, the conveyor running. A figure at the sorter waved. "You're just in time," the figure called. It wore his uniform but no face. The scanner in Marcus's hand chimed with the ease of a coin falling into a slot. Transfer to night sort complete. Carts rolled forward on their own, stacking themselves by route. Labels faced out like smiles. On the far wall, a new board had been bolted up, a mirror of the day board where drivers pinned their clipboards. Names were listed in a neat, inhuman hand. R. Olson, K. Nuggian, M. Williams, routes, Frostline loop, Candle Ice spur, Blacktop extension. Under M. Williams, a note glowed faintly. Permanent. He reached to tear it down. His fingers passed through the laminate like it was surface tension and he was only a reflection. "You can quit," the sorter thing said kindly. "You can always quit." The conveyor never slowed. But the town won't. Someone has to keep the parcels moving. Warmth doesn't deliver itself. He thought of the girl in the parka, of the polite men and women at their doors, of Marta, not quite Marta, saying for when the world forgets us again. He thought of the winter 2 years ago when the storm cut the highway, and he sledded packages by hand to the hill houses. Because medicine can't wait on thaw. He'd felt proud then. He felt the shape of that pride now, altered but recognizable, wearing a darker coat. "What happens if I stop?" he asked. The sorter gestured toward the town. The false streets dimmed a fraction, roofs thinning like breath on glass. In the distance, a door opened to no one. For a heartbeat, he saw a family blurred by static. 2 adults, 1 child. Then the door shut and the house unshouldered itself from the night and was gone. The sorrow that bloomed in his chest wasn't his alone. It moved through him like a weather front. "Every parcel is a room," the sorter said, and its voice deepened to include others. The dispatcher, the loader, neighbors he'd known, voices layered like atlas pages. "Every room is a heartbeat. Keep the town fed, and it remembers to be." He could have run then. He could have chosen daylight, insisted the living should be enough. Instead, he picked up the scanner the way a priest picks up a book. The route drew itself without his input. A clean loop, a second loop, a third, a shape that only made sense when you traced it at 03:17 under a sky that refused to dawn. He drove. He still goes home most mornings and makes coffee and pretends the house doesn't echo a fraction late. He still kisses Marta and tells himself the warmth in her cheek is sunlight, not some parcel he delivered to her other door. On some afternoons when the light leans low and the ravens laugh like men who know a joke you don't, he sees a street where no street is, a house-shaped brightness pressed against the air, and feels the itch in his palm the scanner cured. If you're awake at the right hour and the aurora is stitching green thread through a black cloth sky, you might see him. A van gliding silent down streets your map refuses. He won't wave. Professionalism, even here. But your porch light may brighten, and a small box will wait on your step like a heartbeat you didn't know was missing. "Do not open until needed," the label will suggest. You'll forget it until you don't. And when the day fails you for the first time, you'll know which door to try. Not the one you've always used, but the one you swear wasn't there before. Painted a color you once loved and abandoned. When it opens, thank your driver. He keeps the dead fed. He keeps the dark polite. He delivers the warmth that remembers your name. Mike Sullivan knew the first rule of ice roads as bone-deep truth: never leave the main route. The flagged line is the only promise a man can trust when the world's floor is only an inch of faith over a black throat of water. You follow the stakes and the stutter of the pilot car's taillights. You keep your speed steady. No sudden brakes, no heroics. And you pretend the groans under your tires are just the lake talking to itself. Tonight the sky was a bruise lit with green scars. The aurora kept stitching and unstitching the dark like a restless surgeon. His rig, an old Kenworth patched with sheet metal and luck, hauled a flatbed stacked with thermal shelters and drums of diesel shrink-wrapped tight as candy. Heat, bottled and palletized, bound for a distant exploration site where men drilled for hope in a land that didn't much care for hope. The dispatch note had warned of pressure ridges and wind-scoured refreeze. The pilot car went radio silent 2 miles back in blowing snow, then ghosted into the night as if swallowed. Mike should have stopped. He should have idled in place, called it in, waited for the lead to double back. Instead, the wind eased for a breath and the aurora brightened. And there, off to the right, he saw tire tracks where no tracks should be. A neat twin seam in powder running parallel to the route, sharp-edged like they'd been laid an hour ago. Something big and heavy had taken that line. Something with weight enough to trust. He told himself it was a shortcut cut by another truck to skirt a pressure crack. He told himself a lot of things men tell themselves when they already know they're about to do the wrong thing. He feathered the wheel and drifted off the flagged corridor, easing the Kenworth onto the ghost trail. The ice changed sound. No longer the familiar hollow singing drum, but a denser note, deeper, as if the lake's mouth had filled with snow and the voice had to push through. The dash thermometer read 41 degrees. The heater roared at full and still could only hold the cab to a grudging lukewarm. The CB hissed with a low breath that wasn't static. Ahead, the twin track curved toward a band of darker glare along the horizon. Land or open lead, he couldn't tell. Then kinked sharply around a drift as tidy as a plowed berm. Something about that kink made the hair in his beard freeze stiffer. It wasn't the erratic scribble of a truck correcting a slide. It was careful, precise, like the driver had 9 lives and used none of them. "Sully, you're outside the sticks," the dispatcher should have said. Nobody said it. The only voice in the cab, aside from the heater's ragged prayer, was the Kenworth herself, the old girl muttering through every rivet, "I can carry you, I can carry you. I can carry you," until she couldn't. The first shape darted under the lights as a white smear, low and quick, like a fox without the parts that make a fox make sense. Mike's foot twitched off the throttle. The shape veered, then multiplied. 3, then 5, then a skittering constellation keeping pace at the shoulder where snow turned blue under the halogens. They weren't animals. That fact arrived like a cold coin behind his tongue. Their limbs were wrong. Too many joints, elbows where no elbow need be. And their skin was the color of candle wax held up to a window. He saw their fingers splay against the ice as they ran. Each finger ended in a flat pad that steamed where it touched. Steam in this cold. The truck's warmth drew them like a chapel bell. He didn't floor it. Flooring breaks you. He did what you do on bad ice. He coaxed speed like it was a shy dog. Let momentum knit itself without panic. The creatures kept pace, then angled closer. Low heads turned toward the engine like supplicants at a hearth. One leapt, unfolded onto the running board, and the cab filled with a sweet wrong smell like antifreeze left open in a hot room. Through the glass he saw its face for a half second. Not a face exactly. Featureless except for a slight indentation that pulsed as if tasting. It pressed that knot mouth to the seam around the window, found heat leaking through the rubber and shivered in visible pleasure. Mike grabbed the tire iron from the footwell and swung. The glass held. The thing sloughed away, not broken, simply tired of the effort. It hit the ice and splashed, not water but something thick and quick that snapped back into shape and ran again. The tracks ahead sharpened. The twin seams widened into the suggestion of a lane with a crown. The snow on either side rose into shoulders. He was on a road that wasn't on any grid, and was better built than the one he'd left. The CB clicked. A voice, dry, office clean, said, "Unit 48, maintain your course. You're on approach." "Approach to what?" Mike said to air. The aurora danced like a vein of green fire in black flesh. The land climbed almost imperceptibly. The ice beneath the tires stopped singing. The road surface turned to a matte gray that took no light at all, neither glare nor shadow, like driving on a blank sheet that refused to admit texture. The creatures fell back a car length, then surged. The heater faltered. The growl of the engine deepened into a laboring thud. The needle on the coolant gauge edged right. The Kenworth was what they wanted, her heat, her pumping heart. The twin tracks ended at a hump that might have been a pressure ridge or a shore berm. Beyond, the world opened. The beam caught the outline of towers, low, rounded, snow-buried bulges connected by ribbed corridors, a field of humps arrayed with a geometry too careful to be the lake's work. The air over the complex shimmered. Steam rose from vents cut into the ice and drifted horizontal in the wind, then dipped like breath being pulled back into a mouth. The road carried straight to a black circle big enough to swallow a semi, rimmed with ice that had been melted and refrozen so many times it looked like glass. The voice on the CB, Unit 48, throttle to idle. "You are inbound to heat exchange." Mike started to say, "I'm turning around." The wheel didn't listen. The Kenworth nosed onto the circle. The surface dipped. The whole truck sagged the way a bath will sag its rim when a man sits into it. From below, a slow whump, the sound of a giant lung taking first taste. The creatures crowded the rim, dozens now, maybe hundreds, hanging back from the light but pressing against their own need, bodies stacked like ivory kelp. They weren't hunting him. They were praying. The rigs he'd hauled all season, the shelters, the drums, weren't supplies for men. They were offerings. The Arctic wasn't empty. It was feeding. He killed the radio by instinct, a thumb finding the toggle the way a man finds his own pulse. But the voice kept speaking anyway, tinny and composed from somewhere that wasn't the CB. "Unit 48. Stand by for docking." Docking like the truck was a ship coming into harbor. Docking like the ground itself had a berth for heat. Mike shoved the shifter to neutral and feathered the throttle, stupid ritual motion. But the engine answered with a deeper note that didn't belong to combustion. The floor vibrated under his boots in slow, patient waves. Something beneath the ice matched the RPM and then set its own tempo. And the Kenworth fell in line, like an old dog tucking in behind a stronger lead. The circle depressed another inch. The rim cracked with delicate sounds, china fracturing at a tea party, and the cracks healed as fast as they formed, steam knitting them shut. The creatures at the edge trembled, not from cold but anticipation. They pressed hands, pads, to the ice and left prints that glowed dull orange for a heartbeat, the way stovetop elements blush when heat takes them. Mike clawed for action. Reverse, lock the diffs, upshift, downshift, anything, but the rig barely acknowledged gears now. The needles danced to a rhythm his hand could not write. He did the one childish thing left. He turned off the headlights. The darkness rushed in like a mercy that didn't last. Light rose from below, a thick syrupy luminescence that turned the cab a color he'd never seen associated with safety. In that upglow he saw through the windshield, not towers but vents grown like chimneys, their rims lined with something that resembled barnacles and radiators in the same thought. Between them, ribbed tunnels pulsed subtly as if peristalsis lived at architectural scale. The field was not built. It had grown. "Heat exchange ready," the polite voice said from nowhere and everywhere. The steering column warmed under his palms as if gripped by another set of hands. He yanked them back. The wheel turned on its own, quarter-inch adjustments with the smug neatness of a surgeon stitching skin. The hood dipped. A hatch he had not seen opened in the circle's center. No seam before, then a seam, then a parted mouth, and hot air washed the grill and the Kenworth side. On instinct that predated fear, Mike killed the ignition. The key fought him like a trapped animal, vibrated against his fingers, then rotated. The engine quit. Silence slapped the cab. He heard the far ice booming with cold, heard his own thin breath and the whisper of snow snakes on the windshield. For 2 seconds he thought he'd won. Then the truck kept idling without power. The tack needle held at 600, beautiful as a lie. The glow from below strengthened, and with it the heat, a velveteen warmth that made the air in his sinuses ache like a thaw after a long freeze. The complex drank the radiator like a mouth at a cup. He felt in his chest the sensation from childhood of leaning against a big dog and listening to its heart. Only this dog was the size of counties, and its heart was older than roads. Panic came late and in a clean line. He unlatched, shouldered the driver door, and dropped to the ice. The cold should have knifed him. Instead, the surface underfoot was 32 degrees and rising, a skating rink without the bite. The creatures withdrew from his boots with a courtesy that made him sicker than any aggression would have. They wanted the rig. They would not waste energy on peripheral meat. He ran anyway, angling not for the flagged route but the dim suggestion of shore. His headlamp carved a cave through steam. Behind him, the Kenworth's frame flexed with a patient groan, springs singing as weight shifted. He risked a look. The truck's front bumper kissed the black mouth. Condensation ran from chrome in threads, fell, and was sucked inward like rain caught by a drain in reverse. The hood descended an inch, then 2. The cab followed, hydraulic lines stretching in long spider silk filaments that trembled and snapped with little blue sparks. The trailer's pallets glowed through their wrap, each drum humming like a tuning fork at a note he felt in his molars. They slid forward without friction, as if on a belt he couldn't see, and vanished with the good manners of freight delivered on time. The creatures keened once, thin, soft, almost embarrassed by joy, and folded themselves flat to the ice, licking heat that bled through from below with those featureless mouths. The polite voice spoke again, closer now, as if at his ear. "Unit 48, your contribution is appreciated." "I'm not a unit," Mike said, and his voice sounded small, a man in a heavy coat arguing with weather. "I'm going home." "Home," the voice repeated as if turning a bead on a string. The ice under him bulged gently, lifting him a half-inch, lowering him again like a chest breathing under a blanket. Routes adjust. Freight finds need. He started to run in earnest. The ice field ahead rose into pressure rubble, shards and slabs, good, solid chaos, the kind he knew. Behind, the circle hissed shut. The glow dimmed to a candle seen through a pocket. The night regained texture, aurora tearing slow green gullies in the dark, wind finding its voice again, the old boom of lake bones. He climbed the shattered ridge and slid down the far side and kept his feet moving into a jog that would be a crawl in 10 minutes. No creatures followed. Why waste their warmth? The feast had ended. He moved until the stars wheeled his world smaller, until the cold finally punished his lungs, until the wind found literacy and began writing bites across his cheeks. The flagged corridor appeared as if embarrassed to be late. Little orange wands half buried, the day route's timid dotted line through black. He laughed once, ugly, and followed it because men follow ropes in caves even after seeing the cave is alive. It took 4 hours to reach the pilot car, drifted to its hood, windshield rucked with snow. The driver's seat was empty. The coffee in the cup holder had a skin on it as smooth as old ice. He keyed the mic. It squealed and spat. He listened through the squeal for the office-friendly voice and found only wind. He walked until a camp light bloomed. Yellow, human, diesel-powered, and then he sobbed into a mitten and put on his face and told a story that any sane boss could file. Pressure ridge. Lost the line. Broke through a skim lead and self-recovered. Freight lost in a shift. He signed the incident report with a glove that would taste like fear forever. Weeks later, a new route memo came down from dispatch. Avoid the eastern flats. Unknown thaw pockets under pressure. A reroute pegged half a day longer. He drove the long way. Everyone did. But sometimes far out where the flagged line bends around a blank place nobody maps, heat goes through the ice on a 50 night. Sometimes he hears an engine idle when his Kenworth is shut down and cold, and he can feel it in his feet the way a man feels a train miles off through the rails. And once, only once, his CB woke at 2:12 with no hand near it and said with gentle gratitude, "Unit 48, stand by." He shut it off and sang ugly to himself until his voice filled the cab with something like proof. If you go out there with a thermographic drone, it will show you nothing but the hemorrhage of camp stoves and the long, hot artery of the transits. Aim it right, though, on a night when the aurora hangs like a green lung, and you'll see a circle that never freezes as fast as it should. A warm coin stamped under black glass. Men will tell you the Arctic is empty. They say it because emptiness is easier than admitting the truth. It isn't empty, it feeds, and sometimes it eats polite, as if we've all agreed to keep the line moving. Jennifer Walsh took the night shift at Polar Market because she needed quiet. After her divorce and the move to Utqiagvik, she'd had enough of voices, friends calling, lawyers calling, her mother calling to say she sounded frozen. The 24-hour store on the edge of the airfield offered exactly what she wanted. Long hours, no daylight, and a world that minded its own business. The pay was lousy, but the manager said, "Nothing ever happens up here after midnight." For the first month, that was true. The automatic doors whispered open for the same half-dozen regulars. Oil rig mechanics, fishermen waiting out storms, a pair of medics who bought energy drinks and never made eye contact. Jennifer restocked, swept, stared at the humming refrigerators, and pretended the world beyond the windows wasn't an endless sheet of dark glass. The sun had set in November and wouldn't rise again until February. She marked the weeks by the angle of the aurora over the parking lot. Then, one night in December, she found a product she didn't recognize. She was facing the soup aisle, refilling a shelf of Campbell's chicken noodle, when she noticed a single can that didn't belong. The label read Campbell Soup, same red-white design, but the letters slightly off as if drawn by memory. The barcode was smudged. She laughed, assuming it was a printing error, but when she tried to scan it at the register, the scanner beeped politely and displayed a new line, SKU 00, midnight line. Price, 0.0. She checked the inventory system. There was no record of midnight line. She shrugged, put the can in the break room to show the manager later, and forgot about it, until the next night, when the shelves restocked themselves. Entire rows of unfamiliar items had appeared. Campbell Soup, Coca-Cola, Cornell Flakes Morton Salted, and a freezer section labeled simply Cold Foods. The labels all looked familiar and wrong, like counterfeit nostalgia. She called her manager, Vic. "Is this some kind of promo?" she asked. "Promo?" he said sleepily. "Jennifer, it's 2 a.m. We haven't had a distributor up that way for a week. Probably a prank." "Then who stocked it?" "The shelves don't stock themselves," he said, and hung up. When she turned back, a customer stood at the end of the aisle. A woman in an old-fashioned parka, frost clinging to her hair. Her skin was pale, her eyes cloudy like ice. "Do you have any of the new soup?" the woman asked. Her voice was paper-thin, whispering more than speaking. Jennifer hesitated, then reached for a can. "This one?" The woman's expression softened, almost grateful. "Yes, that one." She took it in both hands, nodding. "It's been so long." Jennifer started to ring her up, but the scanner refused to read. The woman smiled faintly, placed a single coin on the counter, a dull silver disc with no face, and walked out. The automatic doors didn't open. She simply stepped through them like mist through glass. When Jennifer checked the coin later, it was warm to the touch. The next night, more customers came. They didn't arrive in cars or leave footprints. They drifted in from the dark in twos and threes, all quiet, all polite, all buying from the midnight line. Some asked for things she'd never heard of. Star-Kissed Whale, Lucky State Bread, Gold Dust Coffee. The shelves always had exactly one of each. When she checked the security footage the next morning, the aisles were empty. The registers showed 0 sales, she told Vic again. They come after 2, she said. They buy things that don't exist. Vic stared at her a long moment. You're not sleeping enough. Happens to everyone their first winter. I have proof. The camera logs reset every 6 hours. Always have. That night she stayed past shift, determined to catch whoever was restocking. The clock hit 2:17 a.m. The store lights flickered. Somewhere deep in the aisles, glass clinked. She walked toward the sound and found a man bent over a crate, unloading bottles of Coca-Cola with a faded logo she hadn't seen since the 1940s. Hey, she said. The man straightened slowly. His skin was the color of snowlight, his face kind but wrong, blurred around the edges as if he were still forming. Sorry, he murmured. We didn't mean to bother you. It's just, people get thirsty. You can't be here, she said, backing up. The store's closed, he smiled faintly. The store's never closed. Not for us. When she blinked, he was gone. The crate was full, bottles sweating frost despite the heat. She touched one. It was so cold it burned. She began to notice things after that. Her breath didn't fog anymore. Her reflection in the freezer doors lagged a heartbeat behind. The thermostat always read the same temperature, 33 degrees, sir, no matter how high she turned it. On the 4th night, she checked the aisles again. The shelves stretched farther than they should, an extra turn past frozen goods that opened into a new row marked seasonal. Inside were items she'd never seen but somehow remembered. Snow globes of places that didn't exist, postcards written in handwriting that looked like hers, and candles labeled Home Unsent. At the far end of the aisle stood a door. It was painted the same pale yellow as the store walls, blending perfectly, except for the sign above it, Employees Only. She didn't remember a door being there before. When she touched the handle, it was cold enough to stick to her skin. And from the other side came the faint sound of whispering voices, saying her name. Jennifer didn't mean to open the door. It opened her. The handle bit her skin before she even decided to turn it, a bloom of cold that sank straight to bone. The door sighed inward, slow and patient, as though something on the other side had been waiting centuries for her hesitation to melt. Behind it, no storeroom, no boxes, no stock carts, no humming compressors. Just aisles that shouldn't fit inside the building. They stretched away in neat, endless lines under a ceiling of humming fluorescence that dimmed and brightened like breathing. The floor wasn't linoleum anymore but ice, smooth, milky, faintly glowing. Every few steps she saw movement beneath it, like shadows swimming under frozen glass. Her handheld scanner, just a cheap barcode reader, lit up on its own. The display flickered. Inventory mode enabled user. Walsh, J, active stock. She dropped it. The sound didn't echo. Nothing echoed here. A faint tune drifted through the air, the soft, warbling music the store played through tin speakers during the holidays, but slowed down, warped until it sounded like something played underwater. Between notes came whispers. Not words exactly, but the rustle of things deciding what to say. She turned a corner and saw shelves full of herself. Not literally, not at first. Rows of canned goods labeled Jennifer's Choice. Boxes of cereal featuring a blurred version of her own face. Freezer bags filled with frost and something faintly pulsing inside. Each package had a tag hanging from the shelf. Status restocked, condition excellent. Her breath came fast, frosting the air, and for the first time in days, she saw it. Excuse me, a voice said behind her. She spun. A man stood in the aisle wearing a parka that looked decades out of date, the logo on his chest half faded. Polar Market, 1987. His name tag read, Dan. His smile was kind and thin. His eyes were empty glass. You shouldn't be here during inventory, he said. It confuses the system. I work here, she managed. Overnight shift, he nodded. So did we all at first. Behind him, more clerks appeared. Men and women in uniforms from every decade, carrying boxes, pushing carts, all silent except for the soft squeak of frozen wheels. They moved methodically, their breath hanging in slow ribbons. What is this? Jennifer whispered. Dan tilted his head. The store never closes. Someone has to keep it stocked. He pointed at a row of identical checkout counters farther down the aisle. Behind each one stood a figure, pale, motionless, smiling faintly at nothing. She recognized one instantly, Vic, her manager. He was frozen mid-gesture, one hand lifted as if to hang up a phone. Frost feathered his beard. His eyes moved slightly when she said his name. The scanner on the floor beeped again, brighter now. New text scrolled across the screen. Inventory update. New item added, Jennifer Walsh. Category: personnel, perishable. Her heart stuttered. She kicked the scanner away. It slid down the aisle, stopped against a display of Campbell soup, and dissolved quietly into frost. "I'm not part of this," she said. Dan's smile deepened. "Everyone who stays long enough becomes part of the stock. We sell what the world forgets. We keep it fresh." As he spoke, she felt it, the slow, creeping cold rising from her boots, crawling up her legs like vines. The chill wasn't outside her anymore. It was inside, curling through veins, seeding her nerves with quiet. Her skin shimmered faintly, light catching on the fine frost forming across her hands. "Please," she whispered. "I just want to go home." "You are home," Dan said gently. "The market remembers its own." He reached out to touch her shoulder. She jerked away, and his fingers left behind a perfect white handprint, edges melting, refreezing. The print pulsed once like a heartbeat. She ran. The aisles shifted as she moved, rearranging themselves in impossible geometry. Frozen foods led into household, which led into returns. The further she went, the dimmer the lights became, until the only glow came from product labels, each one whispering softly as she passed. She turned a corner and found herself in the cold food section again. The freezers were open now, their interiors misting gently. Inside lay rows of pale figures wrapped in plastic like meat. She stepped closer. Their faces were serene. Some she recognized, the regulars, the fishermen, the medics. Others she'd never seen, faces from old photographs frozen mid-laugh. Each had a barcode stamped on their wrist. When she leaned close to one, the fog on the glass cleared just long enough for her to see her own reflection. Not mirrored, but watching her back. The reflection moved first. It smiled. The lights flickered. Somewhere, a register dinged. She stumbled backward into the next aisle and collided with a stack of boxes labeled Home, Unsent. One split open, spilling contents onto the floor. Inside were letters, hundreds of them addressed in her handwriting. She picked one up. The return address read Polar Market Customer Service inside in faint gray ink. "We miss you. Please come back soon. Your shelf is getting cold." The cold surged through her chest. The lights dimmed again. She turned and saw herself at the register. Her reflection stood behind the counter, hair neat, smile polite, hands folded. "Welcome to Polar Market," it said.
"Can I help you find anything tonight?"
Jennifer took a step back, trembling. "You're not real." "Neither are the customers," the reflection said. "But they need someone to serve them. I'm not staying. You already have." The floor beneath her hummed softly, and when she looked down, she saw faint light tracing her outline, like a product about to be scanned. Her limbs felt heavy, her skin cool and dry. The reflection gestured toward the register. "Just one more transaction," it said. "Then it will all make sense." Jennifer tried to run, but her legs refused. She looked down again. Her boots were gone. Her feet were bare, pale, and dusted with frost. The barcode on her wrist was already forming. She heard the doors open behind her, soft, polite, automatic. The night wind didn't enter. The customers did, pale, whispering, clutching coins that glowed faintly in their palms. Jennifer felt her lips curl into a smile that wasn't hers. "Welcome," she heard herself say, voice distant and slow. "We have everything you've forgotten." The scanner beeped. The till drawer slid open. When morning came, Vic's replacement found the store spotless, aisles pristine. The cameras showed nothing, only the hum of refrigeration steady and calm. The manager logged in, checked inventory, frowned. One new item had been added overnight. Walsh. Jennifer. Status in stock. Condition. Perfect. And if you visit Polar Market on a winter night, past 2:17 a.m., the lights sometimes flicker on their own. A soft voice greets you from behind the counter. She looks friendly, familiar. Her name tag says Jennifer. If you listen closely, you'll hear the whisper that follows every sale, quiet as a freezer's hum. Thank you for shopping the midnight line. Come back before you thaw.